Good evening, everyone, and I hope everyone enjoyed today's terrific sessions. Congratulations to our terrific Fortune team for putting together such a phenomenal program. Brainstorm Tech continues to be one of Time Inc.'s signature events, and we are very proud of Fortune's live media division, which has expanded significantly over the past couple of years. And we hope to see many of you at more of our conferences in the coming months. It's an honor for me to introduce our next speaker for a session that will no doubt be one of the highlights of this year's event. A retired four-star general, General Stanley McChrystal, is the former commander of U.S. and international security assistance forces in Afghanistan and the former commander of the premier military counterterrorism force, the Joint Special Operations Command. He is best known for developing and implementing the current counterinsurgency strategy in Afghanistan, and for creating a comprehensive counterterrorism organization that revolutionized the interagency operating culture. In 2011, General McChrystal co-founded the McChrystal Group, where he is currently a partner. McChrystal's group mission is to deliver innovative leadership solutions to American businesses to help them transform and succeed in challenging and dynamic environments. In addition, General McChrystal is a senior fellow at Yale University, their Jackson Institute for Global Affairs. He sits on the board of the Yellow Ribbon Fund, Navistar International Corporation, and JetBlue Airways. He is also chair of Service Year Alliance, a project of Be the Change, and the Aspen Institute. I'm suddenly not feeling worthy. We look forward to hearing him weigh in on today's political climate and how executives should lead in this era, in a conversation with our very own Fortune's Adam Lashinsky. Please join me in welcoming General Stanley McChrystal and Adam to the stage.
Thank you, Rich.
Rich, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Rich, and welcome back, everybody. And Stan, welcome to our stage for the not for the first time. I just want to say, I'm sure on behalf of everybody, that it's an honor to have you here. You know, you and I are both believers that most Americans should do some form of national service. I say that as someone who has not done national service, and I just want to thank you for your service because it's a big deal.
Well, you're kind. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you for that. So, when you were in active duty military, you were known as I think the expression that got thrown around was a warrior scholar, and you have proven that out as a civilian. You've become a scholar. You've become a book author, and I thought I'd like to plunge right in with the new book that you're working on because you're just getting going, and I think it would be great for everybody to hear what you're thinking about.
Sure. We've written a couple of books, and we just came out with one mission, which follows Team of Teams. But what we've got on the horizon is an aspirational look at leadership, i.e. aspirational for us. We're modeling Plutarch's lives, and we are going to do a pairing of a number of leaders to draw it to a thesis. And the thesis is basically this. We've lived for many years thinking of leadership somewhat two-dimensionally. We say if you have these characteristics, if you follow these traits, or you study these things, you're going to be a great leader. But in reality, if you go back and study leadership, it's extraordinarily contextual. One leader who's very effective in one context is ineffective in another context. Similarly, someone who's not a very good leader may be extraordinarily successful in someone who is. And so we're looking at unlikely pairs and trying to draw that out. And I think that we're trying to raise the discussion of leadership a little bit from the tactical, day-to-day idea of leadership up to something that I think it's important for all of us to think about.
Now, leading question, because I know this is important to you and germane. You keep saying we. Who's we that you're talking about?
Yeah, I've learned not to do anything alone anymore. I've been married for 40 years. I couldn't do anything by myself. And for this book, and for this book, I've got two co-authors, a guy named Jeff Eggers, a former Navy SEAL who worked with me in Afghanistan and then spent 5 years in the White House. And then I've also got a former Marine officer who Jay Mangone, who then led the Service Year Alliance for 2 years after graduate school at Yale. So I got too high, and then we've got 3 young people of extraordinary intellect who are really going to pull us along.
Also ex-military, or are they civilians?
They are young enough. They have not yet gone in the military.
Okay, and I asked you to say who we is. I'd also like you to say 2 things. Well, number one, who is Plutarch? And what's this book going to be called?
Yeah, it's funny. Plutarch, I used to think it was Mickey Mouse's dog. But really, Plutarch looked at 50 leaders in the ancient world. Many of you will know about Plutarch's parallel lives of the Greeks and Romans. And most of us knew about it, but hadn't really read it. I had read part of it when I was young, and I went back and read every word.
Or excuse me, or in my case, didn't know.
Yeah, exactly. And what he really did is he used models of life, good and bad, to look at leadership, largely looking at it through virtue and things like that. And so what we're trying to do is take a hard look with Plutarch. And what was the other one?
Well, the title of the book.
Well, what I'm lobbying for, and of course this is early, is Leaders, a General Theory of Relativity. And it's because if you remember Einstein, who we are looking at really hard, he had a special theory of relativity which overturned Newton's theories in many ways, or filled them in, but then he found that was incomplete. And then he came up with a general theory of relativity, which was more elegant, more complete, and then quantum mechanics came in and said, no, that's what you had isn't even complete. So my thinking is our understanding of leadership is incomplete. And we need to keep that up. And we won't finish this with this book, and we won't finish this with this interview. But the reality is leadership is something that is so rich and so complex that it's worth a lifetime of study.
And more than one person in the room chuckled when you said, "I'm lobbying for." The firm is called the McChrystal Group, right?
Yeah. But group is the capital G. And one of the things I believe about leadership is autocratic leadership lasts until they assassinate you. And so you have to keep an eye on the group.
Now, I want to ask you to talk about pairs in a moment, but you have a visual that unfortunately it wouldn't work to show this group because it's too granular. But so just try to tell in words, if you would, the process that you're going through in deciding the pairs that you want to investigate for this book.
Right, we're trying to look at people that you might not think of. So we're thinking of someone who might have been a famous entrepreneur, Ferdinand de Lesseps, who built the Suez Canal and then failed building the Panama Canal. And maybe compare him to a modern entrepreneur, maybe Elon Musk, somebody like that, who has done some amazing things and is shooting further. And so we haven't set on the pairs yet, but we're trying to take a look that makes us delve into personalities, some of whom were good people, some who were bad, some who were successful, some who weren't, and try to draw out the lessons from that.
Share one pair that you think you're excited about, probably will be in the book.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. We are pretty sure we're going to use Einstein, and we're pretty sure we're going to use Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Wow.
And most of you go, he was a psychopath, and that's true. But he was also an extraordinarily effective leader. And in fact, he is the godfather of ISIS now. He's the person they quote. He's the person whose picture they put on the walls. And so even though he's dead, he has this extraordinary tail to his influence. And that's a mark of effectiveness.
I think at Time Inc. we can appreciate that because Time Magazine for years has had it was first the Man of the Year, then Person of the Year, and has gone to great pains to say, this isn't someone we necessarily admire, but they're in the news and we need to learn from them.
Exactly.
Briefly talk about, you've been out of the military for 7 years now, is that correct?
7 years.
Briefly tell everybody about the corporate work that you're doing and that focused on leadership.
Yeah, when we got out, we had this experience, particularly in JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, in which an organization traditionally focused as a military organization, purpose-built for something, found itself inappropriate for a changed environment. And so when we got out of the service, we said, well, that may be a universal lesson. So we took that to the corporate world, and we found that's exactly right. We find structures which were based on industrial age structures, which were absolutely right, extraordinarily effective for generation after generation, suddenly started being ineffective, not because they were stupid or lazy, but because the environments changed so fundamentally. Information moves so fast, things are so interconnected now that we've gone from an age of complicated to complex. When you're in a complex environment, traditional bureaucratic mechanical structures struggle. and they do things to try to cope with it. They work harder, they come up with more rules-based systems, and then they ultimately find they just can't do it. And they are overtaken by smaller organizations faster who come in who don't have some of the baggage of traditional organizations. So what we do is we go into companies and we help them make the change. It's not a technological change, although new technology is always involved. It's a cultural change, because technology is never the thing that is the problem. You can get somebody to implement technology and it can be effective, but getting the organization to modify its culture to be effective in that environment, communication, decision-making, and things like that, is extraordinarily difficult.
You made a conscious decision not to do defense work. Why?
Well, everybody expected a retired military guy to go into the defense industry, and it's a great industry, but it wasn't something that I wanted to do, because I wanted to do something where I'd learn something different, and I just thought that would be more interesting and slightly surprising. And so when we go into corporate environments, like the first time we met, you're kind of like, what are you doing?
I don't remember saying that.
What makes you think you can do that? And I sort of enjoy that shock.
I want to challenge you methodologically on something with regard to your corporate work, which is, to you, one of the most important concepts, in addition to leadership, is mission. Everyone in this room understands what a military mission means. You're trying to defend a country. You're trying to kill the enemy. It's fairly clear. And I'm unclear how well that extrapolates, because I understand that companies need to have missions. But I also understand in today's environment with investors and whatnot, the company has no loyalty to the employees necessarily. They might fire you even though you did just well. And so I'm making a case here. Who cares about mission?
Yeah, well, it's hard. And, a corporation will sometimes say, our mission is to get everybody to have a environmentally good yard or something like that. And that's our mission in life. Well, in reality, the corporation exists to make money. I mean, that's why you created it. And so if you say one thing and try to pretend something else is the reality, you have a mismatch. So I think both can be true. You can be a company that makes money, that has a mission, but the most important thing about the team is to be very straight with them about what are we trying to do, and communicate it to everybody, I think, more aggressively than we have in the past, because your mission constantly shifts a little bit. People have got to have a common purpose aligned to that mission, so they're working to it. And if there's a say-do gap, there's a gap in what leadership says and then what they actually do, you're going to have a tremendous amount of cynicism built up around the organization.
One of the bigger problems in the corporate world is that the current state of affairs, the employees aren't always suited for the current state of affairs. They might have come up in an earlier era. You experienced the same thing in the military, and it revolved around people who were trained in peacetime.
Yeah, in fact, our communications people in our command were trained on a whole suite of equipment, and when we got into combat, we didn't use any of it. And so they had to learn on off-the-shelf commercial stuff, and they had to learn right there. They were completely capable of doing that. That wasn't a problem. But we had to understand that. And we couldn't say, come in, you don't know your job, because the training base couldn't keep up with the requirement. It's true. Lots of times we say people can't rise to a new environment or a new job or things. They typically can, but you need to understand they'd like to hold on to what they have. Not because they're stupid, but because that's what's worked. If you look at a culture of an organization, it reflects what has worked in the past. And so people have stakes in that. They have an equity in what got them successful, what has proven effective. And so they're reticent to suddenly let go. It's like asking a pro football team, Super Bowl winners, to play basketball next season. They're going to be hesitant. And so you got to really communicate that across the organization.
As a general, were you able to move people who were the wrong people out as quickly as you would have liked?
The military's not good at that. You sometimes watch movies and you think the military, every time somebody screws up, you're fired. That's not at all true. Back in the Second World War, they did it more, but in the years after that, we developed a culture which is not entirely good, and that is, if someone has a failure of any kind in their career, that ends their career. So they can't go out and have a bad showing in one job, recover from it, and then be promoted, like I think would be better. So as a consequence, the military is very slow to move people out of jobs. And there's a 2-year tour for most jobs, and so you have this habit to wait them out. And I think that's not good for the organization. And you also got to remember, with a small professional military, a lot of the people you're dealing with, you've known for 30 years. They were at your wedding. And so even though they're a great person and they're trying really hard, I mean, there's a human factor to that. And so it's more difficult than people would sometimes perceive.
That's obviously totally germane to the corporate audience as well. Deep friendships occur. I'm going to switch gears completely here. And first, at the very high level, I want to ask you for your assessment of the state of U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, I think the state of, yeah.
He's a big boy. He can handle this.
You must complete the sentence by telling me what U.S. foreign policy is.
See what I mean?
Yeah. Here's the issue of U.S. foreign policy that, from my perspective, it's all about allies. It's all about relationships. It's all about friends. And that's not about just natural interest. There's this national interest. There's this old thing that Britain used to say, Britain has no allies, only interests. Well, the reality in the world, what I found is leaders do things for leaders. They have national interests, but there are relationships of trust, history that matter a lot. And so I think it's very important that we're not a superpower in the sense we were 46% of the world's GDP right after World War II. One nation. Now that was aberrational. We're not that anymore. We're still very powerful, but we're in a world where there are a lot of nations that matter. And how we knit together with those allies, those people may not be close allies, but we have relationships is really important. And I think American foreign policy needs to be focused on that.
Well, can you take it a step? Okay, yeah, sure. Can you take it? I think it's a fair point. It would be hard to define what our foreign policy is, but we have a president who speaks about America first, who says that the NATO alliance is obsolete, then says it's not so obsolete anymore, and who has, let's say, made unkind comments about allies. I think that's what you're alluding to. Am I asking the right questions?
Yeah, in an annoying sort of way, yeah.
You're not the first person to say that today.
No. It's what endears you to people. Yeah, I mean, the mere saying of America first may make us sound good. Of course it's America first.
Yeah.
When I dealt with Pakistan, it was Pakistan first. That's their job. But the reality is when you make America first a bumper sticker and you pump it overseas, what you're telling them is America only. And that's not, we need to understand people around the world, we don't get up in the morning and know what's happening in Bombay. We don't know what's happening in countries in Latin America. They know what's happening in the United States. And that's not a bad thing, but that's something we need to understand. How we present ourselves matters a lot. And every American, not just at the senior levels, every American. And if we want to be members of the world community, we need to think that way.
I'm going to ask you one more annoying question about leadership, which is if when you were an active duty general and you had somebody in your command who publicly made demeaning comments about colleagues, subordinates, partners, what would be the repercussions of that?
What we look for in leaders is a complete picture, not a single thing. Leaders need to be smart. They need to be inspirational. They need to be consistent. They need to be honest. Nobody's all of those things in equal or perfect measures. Everybody's flawed, and you try to put people together. But there's a norm into which you can look at a leader and you can say, you're not perfect, but I trust you. You're not perfect, but I think you're doing your best. You're not perfect, but you respect people. I think that's what we look for in leaders. That's what I looked for in leaders. And that's what I hope for when I look for leaders now.
And in your opinion, is the President of the United States a good leader?
I don't think his hair would have passed my command standards. No, it's a judgment we all got to make. And the reality is each of us is going to look at the President of the United States through our own lens. But what I'd say is we need to do that personally. Don't let somebody do it for you. Don't watch TV and have somebody say good, bad, up, down. We're all smart people. Force ourselves to make a judgment. And sometimes force yourselves to make a judgment standing in what you think it's like to be in his shoes. I've never been president, but I spent some time in the Oval Office. And every time I was in the Oval Office, I felt a little insecure and whatnot. And every time I got out of the Oval Office, I said, wow, that was really cool to be in there, but I'm really glad I'm not in there too much. And so we got to be empathetic for the person that is sitting or standing in that office and make our own judgments.
I'm going to annoy my stage manager by saying we're definitely going to take just a few extra minutes with this interview because there's so much we want to talk about, and I want to hear what you want to talk about. So please, questions. I see one right up. Well, let me get someone further back. Yeah, right there. Yes, please. Please identify yourself.
Thank you. Elena Kvochko, I'm the CIO in the Group Security Division at Barclays. General McChrystal, in Team of Teams, you describe a very important process of making your team work like a clock. And this is a very big focus for us in security, where we want the teams to work on a muscle memory, and this is how we want our GSOCs to operate. Yet when you speak to companies from startups to Fortune 1000, they all say that the biggest issues they're dealing with are not really tech-related, but human-related. So what advice would you give to us all who are, managing teams to making this cultural shift and becoming better leaders?
Well, thanks. And you're exactly right. What we find in organizations that we work is if they get the tech right part, even if they get the strategy right, and they usually do. You go to an organization, it's not usually the strategy that's wrong, it's the ability to implement it because people aren't aligned on it. And it starts with we organize ourselves into rational organizations. We put HR, we put R&D, we put finance, and then they develop their own silos, their own cultures, their own habits. They often get in separate buildings, and then they're trying to connect across them, and it gets very, very difficult. Walter Isaacson told us a story this morning about trying to implement high-speed internet where one part of the same corporation wanted to sue another part for using a name.
Happens to be the corporation that we used to be part of. Yeah.
So, I mean, think about that. And, you couldn't make that up, right? But we find that inside organizations all the time. So the first thing I think is understand the problem is people. And it's not that you got bad people, it's the communications part of it. So if you align people, try to build common purpose, what are we about, and trust, that's sort of foundational. Then what we found was most often missing is shared consciousness. Everybody having a common contextual understanding of what the situation is and what we're trying to do. That's really easy to do in a 6-person startup. That's incredibly hard once you're above 150. It is just extraordinarily difficult when you're at 20,000. But it's almost more important than ever before because decisions have to be made close to the point of action now. It's too slow to get them back up again. It'd be great if you could get them back into the one smart person in the organization who knows everything. But if you try to do that, every other organization will be inside your decision loop and crush it.
I know we have one over here, please.
Hi, Jazz Banga, CEO of Airspace Systems. We are working on both the commercial side and the defense side. We build counter-drone systems to stop drones from stadiums and in military. Any advice for us? So these two very different cultures, both military and enterprise.
Yeah, both have their strengths. The military culture has a great sense of mission, a great sense of patriotism, but the rules and regulations for things like acquisition of new technology make it really hard. If you're a commander in an organization and somebody wants to sell you that down at your organizational level, the first thing you do is get your lawyer between you and them, then you get an acquisition guy between you and them, and then you put a wall, because even if you have a meeting, you can get in legal trouble. And think about it, that makes it awfully difficult. So now you've got sort of cutouts dealing with acquisition of something away from the user. And the defense is trying to work that, but it makes it very difficult. Civilian corporations have the ability, they don't always do it, they have the ability to be much faster. You can have decision-making at whatever level they're willing to push it down and empower that. So I think that right now the corporate world has a big advantage in being able to operate quickly and be decisive over most of the military. There are parts of the military that are much more agile. But that's the way I'd look at it. It's 50 years ago, technology went from government to the commercial side. NASA, defense, and whatnot, it was built in things, it was used, and then it matriculated. That's changed dramatically. The vast majority of technology now comes from the other side, and yet the systems haven't yet been completely matured in which that flow can happen as easy as this. How many active military in this room tonight? Active. Well, here's the problem. There ought to be 15 military guys, officers and NCOs in this room, just getting to know you, just listening, just learning, going, wow, what are they talking about?
Yeah, I don't know. By the way, I don't know if 15 is the right number. I would like to pledge right now that we should try to fix that 12 months from now and get some of the right people in this room. And I appreciate that suggestion. I want to come right here.
General McChrystal, my name is Kate O'Keefe. I work for Cisco. Thank you for your service. I'm an immigrant who loves the freedoms in America that you've helped fight for. The technology industry is facing an interesting moment in the topic of gender diversity, which is an issue that, of course, the military has faced for some time. Can you speak a little to that and what you think the value is we're leaving on the table?
Yeah, an extraordinary amount of value. It's just like before the military made changes to integrate races, and then we were very slow in integrating gender. Then we were even slower in integrating gays and whatnot in the military. And everybody there represents some percentage of that population who's motivated, talented, all of those things. Only 30% of young Americans are qualified to enlist in the U.S. military right now. 70% of young Americans don't meet the qualification requirements. So now that 30%, some of those are going to go to big colleges and whatnot. So
This is like health and fitness reasons, or what are the?
it's drug use, it's health, it's legal problems.
Oh.
And these are people who can't if they want to enlist. It's a national security issue. So we've got to unlock our population. The military was slow because, you had sort of a machismo background. You'd have a really talented person come up, and then we'd put them in a job, a female in a job that seemed female-like, like protocol or something. And then when they didn't have the experience to be promoted to senior levels, you go, wow, she just must not have been good enough. We didn't get her ready to be good enough. We didn't give her the same opportunities. There's been a lot of progress, but it isn't over. And it's just going to take pushing, and some time.
Let me plead with you for a quick last question and a quick answer, please.
General, I graduated from the Air Force Academy 2 years.
Tell us who you are,
before
please. I'm
did.
sorry.
Oh, Nathan Rosenberg from Insigniam. Thanks, Adam. I graduated from the Air Force Academy 2 years before you graduated from West Point. When you and I went to the trade schools, they were the only 3 schools in the country that taught leadership. Now virtually every business school teaches leadership. What's the translation from a military discipline to a business discipline?
Yeah, I would have, and you know very well this, I thought that there'd be a big difference. In reality, I found there's very little difference. There's some words and whatnot. I once told Brad Smith of Intuit, we could put a uniform on him and he could be a general officer in 3 months and he'd be a great one. We'd have to teach him a few words and it'd have a salute. He'd be a great one. And that's true. And I think the opposite, I could be the CEO of Microsoft next week if they just give me the damn job. But
They've got a pretty good one now. So
the only thing I'll push back on, I teach leadership at Yale, but leadership is not built in most of the curriculums at much depth. It's sort of taught as an additional skill. And in the corporations that I see, there's a lot of talk about leadership development programs, but the reality is typically way less than the verbiage. And so I would challenge you, if you really want to differentiate yourself, it's not going to be technology, it's going to be quality of people. And leadership development, I think, is one of the biggest things any organization can do.
Stan, very quickly, because I believe passionately on this topic, maybe not passionately enough, would you share with everybody your thoughts on the subject of national service?
Yeah, and thanks for letting me do this. Every young American deserves the opportunity to do a year of national service, in civilian service in America. And they deserve it because you come out differently. Statistically, people who serve in City Year AmeriCorps, Teach for America, any of them, vote at 3 times the rate of people who don't. They tend to stay committed for the rest of their lives. They're different kinds of citizens. They get a feeling of self-worth that comes from that experience that you don't get from civics class in school. Even if you believe this is a chance to absolutely experience it. And if we do it right, you experience it with people who are not from your zip code, not from your background, and suddenly you realize everybody who isn't like me is okay. And to me, that's just extraordinarily important. I think with the divisions in our nation, we're talking about this big infrastructure bill, and I'm for it. We're going to build roads and bridges. The bridges we better be building are between ourselves as citizens, and I think this is the way to do it.
But you've been working on a project for several years now with the Aspen Institute, but this is an eminently sensible idea. Nothing much comes of it. Some money is needed. What's standing in the way of this happening?
Well, us. I began this when I gave a speech at the Aspen Ideas Festival, and in the Q&A, somebody asked me about this, and I said, yeah, we should have national service. And the next week, Walter Isaacson called me and said, would you be the chairperson? So no good deed goes unpunished. I've been it for 5 years, and I am more passionate every year. Here's what stops us. Most families don't have anybody in the family who served anymore. The military's small and it's insular. And so at the dinner table, mother, father, uncle, aunt didn't do it, so they're not pushing kids. Plus, we don't get the word out. And then at the end of the day, the biggest problem is we don't have enough opportunities. Demand is huge among millennials. In 2012, there were 580,000 applications for AmeriCorps for 80,000 slots. Teach for America is harder to get accepted to than Yale. So we have this extraordinary desire to do it. So part of it is us pushing our government, because this is partially government, pushing our own corporations, pushing our own colleges, and participating in philanthropy to make it happen. It's all the pieces of that. If somebody wants to come and work at your company and they're graduating from a great school and you want them, great thing to do is say, great, go do a year in national service, report a year from now, job is guaranteed, it'll be waiting for you.
It's a great idea. I apologize for ending on a downer, but I want people in this room to know about your experiences. I'm going to make an unfortunate joke. Most people would be delighted to know that Brad Pitt was playing them in a feature film, but there's a new film called War Machine, which is a caricature of your time in Afghanistan. They played it as a caricature. It's a fictionalized version. You had a very public fall from grace, ended your career. Just briefly, share with everybody how here you are, you picked yourself up and you went on with your life. How did you do that?
Yeah, when I was commanding in Afghanistan, an article came out in Rolling Stone magazine. You may have read it. I quit my subscription. And it portrayed myself and my staff in a way that, got me in trouble in my career, and that's fine. And so the first thing you want to do is you kind of want to curl up in a fetal ball and feel sorry for yourself. Because every minute on TV, you're on the ticker. Every 2 seconds, disgraced Army general. And guess what? It's not me seeing it. It's my son in college seeing it. It's my 86-year-old father seeing it. It's all the people who trusted me. And suddenly, my name is linked to disgraced. I never expected that. I thought I might get killed or fired for incompetence, which would have been fair. But I never thought I'd be accused of something like that. And it doesn't matter whether you're right, wrong, guilty, upper, because you're always a little bit guilty of anything like that. The reality is you got to decide what you're going to do. And the first thing I had to do was face Annie, my wife. I came home from Afghanistan, went into the Oval Office, ended my career after 34 years, drove home 15 minutes later. I'd been in Afghanistan, come in, I see my wife, and I say, honey, it's over. My career's done. And she looked at me, and some people would have said, you got screwed, this. She didn't. She smiled. She says, good. We've always been happy, and we always will be happy. And so I tell people that Annie drives or lives like she drives, not using the rearview mirror. And so, yeah. You got to decide at that point, are you disgraced? Are you defeated? Are you a failure? And you have to make that internal judgment, and it's hard. And you don't just say it. You don't look in the mirror and say, no, you are right, you're a good guy. It happens every day over an extended period of time. And it gets a little easier every day. But the reality is, you meet people and you wonder what they're thinking. People write articles and you think, well, that's not fair. Somebody makes a movie and you think, well, that's not accurate. What are you going to do? You're going to say, well, I got a boo-boo. No, hey, I'm on the stage with you. I mean, that's extraordinary honor. I don't deserve this. So a lot of the good things that I get in life, I don't deserve. So I'll take the ones that I think I might not deserve otherwise.
I think everybody would agree with me that. I think everybody would agree with me that we have a lot to learn from you, and we could have gone on for, I think, 2 more hours, and it was a real honor for me. And so everybody, please join me in thanking General Stanley McChrystal.
Thank you so much. Thank you.